Primitive shelter building is one of the most crucial skills in any survival scenario, especially when you're stranded on a forgotten island with no modern comforts. The first challenge I faced after landing was where to rest, sleep, and stay safe from the elements. With no tent or pre-made structure, I had to rely on my survival knowledge and the materials around me to construct a shelter that would keep me dry, warm, and protected. The key to shelter building is assessing your environment. I scanned the terrain for elevated ground to avoid flooding, areas shielded from wind, and natural overhead cover such as dense tree canopies. Once I found a suitable spot, the next step was gathering materials. Fallen branches, driftwood, large leaves, and vines became my construction supplies. I didn't have nails or a hammer, so every joint and attachment had to be secured with lashings made from vines or strips of cloth from my pack. Using a basic lean-to design, I started with a sturdy ridge pole anchored between two trees. This would be the backbone of the shelter. I laid angled support branches along one side of the ridge to create the slanted wall, ensuring that rainwater would run off instead of pooling. Covering this framework took patience. I layered palm leaves, ferns, and bark in overlapping shingles to keep out moisture and wind. The goal was insulation and protection. I used thick piles of dry leaves and pine needles inside for bedding to lift my body off the cold ground and retain body heat during the night. Building shelter isn't just about physical construction. It's about time management, resource allocation, and decision making. Do you build fast and flimsy or slow and sturdy? In my case, I chose to spend more hours on day one building something that would last all 7 days. That effort paid off when storms hit on the third night and my shelter remained intact while the winds howled and rain fell for hours. I also took precautions for safety. The entrance was narrow to keep animals out, and I stacked thorny branches around the back perimeter to deter curious wildlife. I left a small air gap near the roof to allow smoke from my fire to escape, and I built a low stone wall to reflect heat into the shelter when the nights got cold. By the end of day one, my hands were raw, my back sore, but I had a home. Not one with 4 walls and a roof, but a place carved out of the wilderness with nothing but willpower and bushcraft. Shelter is the foundation of survival. Without it, you're vulnerable to cold, heat, insects, and fear. With it, you create the first piece of control in a chaotic environment, and that control keeps you alive. Water is life, and on a forgotten island with no civilization, finding it becomes your #1 priority after shelter. Without clean water, your body begins to deteriorate rapidly. Dehydration affects your ability to think clearly, move efficiently, and make rational decisions. So the first task on my second day of this 7-day off-grid challenge was to secure a reliable source of fresh water. And that meant getting creative and staying calm. The island's shoreline offered nothing drinkable. Salt water is deadly. I moved inland, following the landscape for any signs of water, animal tracks, dips in the terrain, or plant life that suggested moisture. Eventually, I found a small trickle seeping from a rock face. It was muddy, but it was water. The first thing I did was build a simple catch basin using rocks and bark to pool the slow drip. Over time, the basin filled enough for me to begin collecting. But raw water in the wild is dangerous. It can carry parasites, bacteria, and viruses. That's why purification was the next essential step. I didn't have fancy gear, but I did have knowledge in a fire. I used my stainless steel container to boil the water for at least 5 minutes, longer than usual, just to be safe. It's not just about removing debris. It's about killing invisible threats that could wreck your health in a matter of hours. I also built a solar still as a backup. I dug a hole in the sand, placed a container in the center, filled the edges with green leaves and moisture-rich plants, then stretched a piece of plastic over the top with a small stone in the center. The sun heated the plants and condensation formed on the plastic, eventually dripping into the container. It was slow but steady. Every drop counted. Another trick was harvesting rainwater. On day 3, clouds rolled in and dumped a tropical storm on the island. I placed every container I had out in the open, even cut large banana leaves to act as funnels. In an hour, I had collected enough water for 2 days. Survival means adapting fast and maximizing every opportunity. Even coconut water helps supplement hydration. I cracked open fallen coconuts, making sure they were fresh by checking for mold or sour smell. The liquid inside is packed with electrolytes, perfect for rehydrating and energizing. Water isn't just about drinking, it's essential for cooking, cleaning wounds, and even cooling your body down in high heat. Managing your supply, using it wisely, and never wasting a drop can make the difference between life and death. On that island, every sip reminded me I was still in the fight. Hydration is survival, and finding it isn't just a task, it's a daily mission. Food is fuel, and on a remote island with no grocery store, no stock pantry, and no guarantee of anything edible, it quickly becomes one of the most mentally and physically demanding parts of survival. By day 3, the hunger kicked in hard. My body was burning calories just to stay warm at night, to build shelter, to hike, to think. A hike, to think. And now it needed nourishment. The challenge wasn't just finding food, but identifying what wouldn't kill me. I started with the shoreline. The ocean is a buffet if you know how to read it. I scanned tide pools at low tide, looking for anything edible. Small crabs, mussels, sea snails, and even edible seaweed. I didn't touch anything I couldn't confidently identify. This is where knowledge becomes life insurance. I used a sharpened stick as a spear and patiently waited at the edge of the tide pools. It took hours, but I managed to catch a few crabs and small fish. Not a feast, but enough to get by. Fire made everything safer to eat. I roasted the crabs over open flame until their shells cracked and meat steamed. The salt from the sea gave them flavor, but more importantly, heat killed any harmful bacteria. Foraging inland was the next move. I searched for wild fruits. Bananas, berries, and coconuts. Again, caution was key. Bright colors can sometimes mean poison, so I stuck to what I recognized and tested everything in tiny amounts first. Wild bananas and coconuts became my go-to. They're energy-dense and safe if harvested right. Coconuts were a lifesaver, not just for hydration, but for fat and fiber. I smashed them open with rocks and used the husks to create tools or fuel for fire. Even the meat, shredded and roasted, gave me enough energy to keep going. I also explored insects as an option. It's not glamorous, but protein is protein. Ants, grubs, and beetles are often abundant and safe to eat when cooked. They're surprisingly nutritious and easy to gather, if you can get past the mental barrier. I set basic traps using vines and tension branches, hoping to catch small game like birds or rodents, but success was limited. Trapping takes skill and luck, and on a 7-day window, it's not a reliable primary food source unless you're highly experienced. Instead, I leaned on persistence, daily gathering, checking tide pools, and using every part of what I caught or found. Hunger will test your patience, your decision-making, and your willpower, but it also sharpens your instincts. You learn to value every calorie, every bite. Food becomes sacred and waste becomes unacceptable. On that island, finding food wasn't just survival, it was a lesson in gratitude, in grit, and in resourcefulness. You don't just eat to stay alive, you eat to keep going, to keep building, to keep building, to keep fighting for one more day off the grid. Water was the most critical resource during my 7 days off the grid. You can go weeks without food, but only a few days without water before your body starts shutting down. Dehydration creeps in faster than you'd expect, especially when you're exposed to the sun, exerting yourself physically, and losing moisture through sweat. The first priority when I landed on that forgotten island was finding a reliable water source. Without it, the challenge would have been over before it really began. There were no flowing rivers or streams on the surface. The dense jungle didn't offer any obvious signs of fresh water. That meant I had to turn to 2 reliable survival techniques, collecting rainwater and extracting moisture from plants. I built a simple rain catch system using large leaves, bamboo stalks, and coconut shells to direct and store rainfall. It was slow, but every drop mattered. I also used plastic from my emergency kit to create a solar still, a hole in the ground lined with vegetation, with plastic sheeting stretched over the top, and a small cup in the center to catch condensation. Again, it wasn't much, but it added up. Coconuts were an early blessing. The water inside green coconuts is sterile, hydrating, and loaded with electrolytes. I ration them carefully. Too much too fast can cause stomach issues, and I needed to keep my energy steady, not waste it dealing with cramps or diarrhea. I also learned quickly not to rely on salty ocean water for anything other than cooling off or rinsing. Drinking seawater will dehydrate you faster. It's one of the worst mistakes a stranded person can make. Boiling water became essential. I collected water in improvised containers, bamboo tubes, and hard-shelled coconuts, and boiled it over the fire. This killed parasites and bacteria I couldn't see. Even water that looked clean could carry harmful microbes, and I wasn't about to take the risk. A single illness in a survival situation can be a death sentence. Fire and time were my purifiers. Hydration was a constant battle. I had to pace myself, especially during physical tasks like building shelter or gathering food. I made it a habit to drink small amounts regularly, especially in the morning and evening when it was cooler and easier on the body. Staying alert meant staying hydrated. When your mind is foggy and your muscles cramp, that's your body begging for water. In survival, water is your clock. It dictates how long you can last, how far you can travel, and how well you can think. It's not just a necessity, it's power. Without it, none of the other skills or tools matter. You can't fight, build, plan, or even hope without water. On that island, I didn't just search for it, I respected it. Every drop was a victory. Every drink was another step forward. And in that environment, one step at a time is the only way to win. Food was a slow-burning concern during my 7-day survival challenge on the Forgotten Island. Unlike water, the effects of hunger don't show up immediately, but the longer you go without food, the more it chips away at your energy, focus, and morale. On the first day, I wasn't too worried. My body could rely on reserves. But by the second and third days, hunger had become a constant background noise, one that only grew louder as the days passed. I didn't bring any food with me. That was part of the challenge. The goal was to live off the land, using only what nature provided. The island's ecosystem was wild but not barren. I just had to learn how to read it. At first I scouted for familiar signs, fruit trees, edible plants, and insect activity. Eventually, I spotted wild banana trees and a few patches of edible berries. I tested everything using basic survival rules, rubbing a small piece on my skin, waiting for a reaction, and trying a tiny taste only after ensuring no immediate effects. But plants alone wouldn't cut it. I needed protein to maintain my strength. That meant turning to bugs, crabs, and fish. Gathering crabs from tide pools became a routine. They were surprisingly abundant and fairly easy to catch once I understood their habits. I used sharpened sticks and small traps fashioned from bamboo to improve my odds. Fish were harder. Without a proper rod or net, I had to get creative, building a small fish trap from rocks in shallow water and spearfishing with a carved stick. I didn't always succeed, but when I did, it felt like striking gold. Cooking was essential. Eating raw shellfish or fish risked parasites and illness, which could be devastating in such isolation. I built a stable fire pit and made use of hot stones and simple skewers to cook what I caught. The act of cooking not only made the food safer, but also boosted morale. The smell, the warmth, the sizzle, it reminded me of normal life and gave me something to look forward to after long hours of work and foraging. One unexpected food source came from insects. I never thought I'd be eating grubs, beetles, or ants, but in survival, you adapt. Many insects are packed with protein and easy to find under rocks, logs, or leaves. They weren't gourmet meals, but they kept me going. Hunger humbles you. It strips away preference and makes you grateful for anything that sustains life. Rationing was important too. When I found a cluster of fruit or caught more crabs than I needed for one meal, I preserved what I could by smoking it or simply drying it under the sun. Waste was not an option. Every calorie counted. By the end of the week, I had learned that food is more than fuel, it's hope. Every bite gave me strength, not just in my body, but in my spirit. Finding it took work. Eating it gave purpose. And together they pushed me forward when giving up would have been easier. Sleep became one of the greatest challenges during my 7-day survival test on the Forgotten Island. Not just because I was physically exhausted, but because nature doesn't stop to accommodate human comfort. The moment the sun dipped below the horizon, the island transformed. The darkness was thick, unbroken, and alive with sounds. The rustling of unseen creatures, the rhythmic crashing of waves, the sudden calls of birds or monkeys overhead. My first night was nearly sleepless, not because I didn't want rest, but because my mind couldn't settle in the unfamiliar. The shelter I had built offered some psychological comfort, but structurally it wasn't much. Just a lean-to made from palm leaves and branches with a makeshift bed of soft grass and large leaves. The ground was hard, and the humidity made everything damp. Insects found their way into everything, and I had to improvise with ash, mud, and smoke to keep them at bay. Every movement in the night made me tense. Every sound could have been a predator or an unknown threat. Sleep came in shallow waves, interrupted by the buzzing of mosquitoes or the occasional scurrying nearby. But as the days passed, I adjusted. I learned that my body would rest in fragments, 30 minutes here, an hour there. And slowly I began to trust the rhythm of the island. I changed my approach, focusing on preparing for sleep the way I would prepare for a hunt or a fire. I gathered dry leaves and soft fibers to improve the padding on my sleeping area. I added more layers of branches to insulate against the cool, damp night air. I positioned my fire close enough for warmth but far enough to avoid sparks. I surrounded my camp with natural deterrents, thorny branches and rock markers, just in case. Mental preparation became just as important. I practiced breathing deeply before nightfall, slowing my thoughts, calming the nervous energy. I created small rituals, tidying the camp, drinking water, adjusting my fire, checking my gear. That gave me a sense of closure to the day. These routines signaled to my brain that I was safe, that it was okay to let go. I even started whispering affirmations to myself. You made it through today? You're strong enough for tomorrow. One unexpected lesson was how precious even 2 hours of good sleep can be in the wild. When you don't have the luxury of full rest, every moment of peace becomes gold. My dreams were vivid, sometimes surreal. I'd wake up thinking I'd heard a voice or seen a light. But each dawn reminded me I had survived another night. Sleep and survival isn't about luxury. It's about recharging just enough to fight again tomorrow. It's about convincing your body and mind that despite the chaos, despite the discomfort, you are still in control. You are still alive. And sometimes just closing your eyes without fear is the greatest victory of all.